largest crowd we've ever had in the history of Inquiring Minds. We've been doing this for like 7 years. I've never seen a crowd this big, so apparently it's all about me. This apparently is a really good topic, so looking forward to the discussion today. Show of hands, how many people are here for the very first time, Inquiring Minds or in the building, either one. So that topic really got to you, huh?
Also provided an email address on the sign and newcomers. All newcomers.
Anyone who needs a notepad?
Oh, never mind. It looks like you got to figure it out.
The rest are here. There's can pens, good writing. These are the right ones.
I'll give it about 1 more minute before we start. So make sure everybody is settled in and relaxed. In the meantime, just out of curiosity, how many people studied anything about transhumanism before today? Quite a few. So we're going to have a really good discussion. This is going to be awesome. For this whole lot. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, especially for those of us that are new here today, I'm going to go through a little bit of a flow, how we do things in this discussion, which is going to be curious with a crowd this big, but we'll do the best we can. So I'm going to facilitate, but basically I'm going to try to stay out of the topic and let everybody else speak. We're not going to have enough time for everybody in here to speak anyway. So yes, this time, Henry, I really am going to stay out of the discussion as much as possible. And I'm going to try to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak if possible. This is a huge crowd. I've never had one this big before, so it may be a little bit challenging to get everybody to have an opportunity to speak. But I know there's a lot of people that are just chomping at the bit to say some things, and I want to give you a chance. So what I want you to do, if you want to say something, raise your hand, get my attention or get Pam's attention, and she'll nudge me, and I'll write your name down on the list. And when it comes your turn to speak, then I'll call on you, and then you have 3 minutes, and I'm going to use a stopwatch. And I'm going to try to really cut it at 3 minutes because we've got a lot of people here. There's a lot to talk about, so we're really gonna have fun with this one. If you have any questions, if somebody's just got finished talking and you have questions for clarification, you just want to clarify something they said. That's it. I don't want any other questions besides that. Just clarification of what they just said, and you can just ask for clarification. You can jump out of turn, but just one quick question, and that's it. Otherwise, we need to go down the list, like I said. And if we stray off topic, which is possible, for a topic like this today, it's possible. If we stray off topic, there's nobody here that I'm not going to hear. Just do this. That's all I need to hear. And I'll know that we're off topic, and we'll talk about it for a second, see if everybody agrees we're off topic. And then if we are, then that person will get skipped. Oh, yeah, you might want to silence your phone. Okay, I don't believe this is going to be an issue, but I always say this anyway, so just everybody understand. I've never had a problem with this, but I always make this statement just so we're clear. Be civil and respectful at all times. I really would appreciate it. We would appreciate it if everybody is respectful of everybody else, especially when somebody has the floor. Please make sure that you are listening to them and not having a chat with your neighbor. So, because every time you're having a chat with your neighbor, everybody in the room can hear it. And it kind of distracts from the person that has the floor. So let's try to be respectful and also being civil. I think the only person that's ever been uncivil in any of our meetings has been me, and I have to apologize profusely for that. We won't be doing that. We're stopping promptly at 11:30, no matter what. So when 11:30 comes around, you can be mid-sentence, I will stop you, and we'll go on because we got a couple other things to wrap up before we go to lunch or everybody else goes off and enjoys the rest of their day. And what we'll do for those two things, first thing we're going to do is go around the room if we have time to do that, and see if we can get a really short summary for everybody of what they got out of today's discussion. I'll talk about that when we get there. And then we're going to try to choose a topic for next month. So, transhumanism. Exciting. So let me read a little bit about this before I turn it over to everybody else. This is just from the wiki page. This is just a real quick for anybody that doesn't know what transhumanism is. By the way, do not confuse transhumanism in any way, shape, or form with humanism. This is a humanist organization. It has nothing to do with transhumanism at all. Not even close. Although there might be an ethical intersection between the two, and we might actually explore that. So we'll talk about that. But humanism and transhumanism, they're totally different things. So transhumanism is an international intellectual movement that aims to transform the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies to greatly enhance human intellect and physiology. Transhumanist thinkers study the potential benefits and dangers of emerging technologies that could overcome fundamental human limitations as well as ethical limitations of using such technologies. The most common transhumanist thesis is that human beings may eventually be able to transform themselves into different beings with abilities so greatly expanded from the current condition as to merit the label of post-human beings. The contemporary meaning of the term transhumanism was foreshadowed by one of the first professors of futurology, FM 2030, who taught new concepts of the human at the New School in the 1960s. They began to identify people who adopt technologies, lifestyles, and worldviews transitional to post-humanity as transhuman. The assertion would lay the intellectual groundwork for the British philosopher Max Moore to begin articulating the principles of transhumanism as a futurist philosophy in 1990, and organizing in California an intelligentsia, that has intelligentsia. Thank you. This is good. Oh, okay. You know Max personally?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
cool.
Max.
Oh, that's Max. Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Okay. She knows it. And that has since grown into the worldwide transhumanist movement. Influenced by several works of science fiction, the transhumanist vision of the transformed future of humanity has attracted many supporters and detractors from a wide range of perspectives, including philosophy and religion. So we're going to be talking about this not only from the technological standpoint, but also from the ethical standpoint, and every aspect of it. If you study transhumanism at all, you found that there's more than one definition. And people study it, or people talk about it very differently, and there's some articles that we posted on our meetup page that are serious critiques of transhumanism, although it turns out that I don't believe any of those were actually written by scientists, but nevertheless, those were some interesting, they delved into the ethical issues with transhumanism quite a bit, and that was really quite good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for discussion, and I'll write down your names as we go. Raise your hand if you want my attention, and I'll write your name down, and we'll start with Mary. Mary, go ahead. You're first.
I think half the world is transhumanist already between eyeglasses, and Bluetooth and smartphones.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes. Chris.
Oh, I just wanted to add something to your introduction. By the door, we have a jar for donations, so if you really like what's happening here, help us out. Thank you.
Chris is our treasurer.
And if you don't like
Kyle,
what's
go ahead.
happening, take some out.
Well, I am the treasurer.
Kyle, go ahead.
So I just wanted to follow up briefly on Mary's point, and to illustrate a difference kind of in the definition that you said versus some of the technologies like glasses and the smartphone, which
And Bluetooth.
are external to physiology. Part of the core definition to transhumanism centered around changing human physiology in some way. We do have aspects of that now in like bionic limbs, and pacemakers are a closer version perhaps. Or there's a set of goggles that can plug directly into the back of the brain to help certain blind impairments see. So there is elements of it beginning now, but I would say 50% probably a little extreme.
You think of all the third world who have glasses, I don't know.
Well, yeah, like I was saying, I don't think glasses quite meets the.
Oh, it is. Part of the definition.
All right.
Meet Mary.
All right, we got to stay on course here. Thank you, Kyle. Catherine, you're up next. Go ahead.
Okay, I think it's easy to get carried away with aesthetic definitions of transhumanism, which is like cyborgs and stuff like that. But I think more important is the ethical implications of transhumanism. I once heard transhumanism defined as the radical notion that good things are good and bad things are bad, regardless of how easy or hard it is to avoid bad things and get good things. So like, death is bad. Immortalism is a subset of transhumanism that says we should try to not die. It's not actually that radical if you think about it that way. It seems pretty, like a pretty obvious thing in my opinion.
Curious. Okay, I got you, Roy. Katya, you're up next.
I just wanted to bring two items of transhumanism too. There is the first aspect, which is the therapeutic one, right? This is everything, as you were mentioning, the glasses and all even hearing aids, anything that we're already using just to help overcome something that is not functioning in our body. And then the second aspect is actually the enhancement itself. You actually working, you're functional, but you want to have something better. You want to have a better vision. You want to do something more. So that's the two pieces for me that I'm seeing in transhumanism: the therapeutic and the enhancement. I have a question.
Okay. Question for clarification, yes.
Catherine?
Okay, my question to you is, would we all be able to afford to get these? I know
If technology gets good enough, maybe. Also, we don't necessarily have to live in a capitalist society in the future. I don't know. There are different ways of
But in
doing
order-
things.
My question is, before, in order to get that part of us to be beyond humanity, to be able to live forever, would that cost us how much money to establish that?
I don't see how
Within
that's relevant to
ourselves,
what she was
provide
talking
that.
about. Mary, please, let's not do that. That's not what she was talking about. Hang on a second.
I think what Mary says is pertinent to this discussion, though maybe.
It is pertinent to the discussion, but it's not what Catherine said.
Right,
That's the
exactly.
point is the question of clarification should be towards what the person just got through saying. So anyway, that's all you want to say? Or you guys? Well, I can
No,
otherwise
but
it's
the
changed.
statement one of the statements I like to make so that we get into the discussion is, what will it take for the people who elect to opt for any kind of enhancements, whether genetic or bionic, what will be the entry cost is important because it will relate to social aspects of our society and whether it will be an accelerator to social schisms or not. And as we think with any kind of technology, it's always like that. The first to enter are the ones people who have the means, but the cost of that technology over time will come down, and obviously will be accessible more democratically to a larger population. The question is, at what point will it be mandatory? I'll stop there because it will evolve from the good things that only the elite can get to, okay, now it's democratically available or it's available to everybody, wide population. With that comes legislation, comes ethics, and that's what I'm hoping we're going to get into these topics. But at one point, what's the turning point where it becomes mandatory?
I apologize, I made a mistake. I thought you were just gonna make it short.
Sure.
It was your turn, so I'm gonna try to keep to the protocol. James is up. Go ahead, James. I'd be careful of that in the future, sorry.
One thing I find interesting is if we do become immortal, like what would happen to the human race? Like, if an organism chooses to be immortal, then it shouldn't reproduce. Otherwise, overpopulation happens. You have tons of immortal beings that never die, they consume too many resources, and that's catastrophic. So if beings like us were to become immortal through technological means, would that effectively stop all natural evolution in human beings, and eventually we only become technologically evolved?
I have a point of clarification on that. Assuming that we reach a state where we are immortal and we have unlimited travel to distant parts of our own galaxy or other galaxies, you technically have infinite space in which to expand. Does that still apply then?
I mean, do we really have infinite space and infinite resources?
We don't have immortality yet.
We don't have immortality yet either, yes, but I mean, it may not be infinite, but come on, we're a tiny, tiny fraction of the total space of this universe.
organic and immortal?
Technologically immortal.
You're technological, I don't know if you're human.
Well, think of Elysium. You ever seen the movie Elysium? They have machines that can reprogram the human cells to, you know, get rid of cancer cells, to get rid of influenza, to get rid of any disease that they want. They can reconstruct a human as long as their brain is still alive.
Let me alter my
Wait,
statement.
I want to keep this in order, so I'm gonna go ahead and write you down, Richard,
Oh.
so you can,
Okay, now I
you can
can make a
expand on that a whole
note.
lot more. Okay, so, Roy, you're up.
If we become immortal, so to speak, then there would have to be no need for sex. And if there was no need for sex, then what's the point of living? There's two primary directives in the universe: reproduction and recycling. Everything reproduces, everything gets recycled. It's a part of the system. And if that stops, for instance, because nothing is going to die, or at least human beings, then what's the point of all this? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. I'm gonna take a short turn. I'm actually gonna take a short turn. Because I want to speak to what Catherine said and then a little bit on what you're saying too. The statement that death is bad, why would in the human psyche, I'll time myself here, why would in the human psyche would death be bad? I mean, if we evolved to try to protect ourselves and keep ourselves surviving and reproducing because that's part of the evolutionary process. Doesn't mean death is bad. In fact, if death didn't exist, there is no species that would survive because we eventually, as James pointed out, we would use up all of our resources. So, and then to Roy's point, a lot of the discussion about transhumanism assumes that when we get to that point where we've gotten our consciousness into these machines, the AI machines, we become, whatever you call that, immortal, we won't have a sex drive. We would just not have any of that. So, yeah, I'm not sure whether we would care. I mean, that's one of the big controversies about this is that it would appear that what they're talking about probably will not have any compassion, empathy, you know, anything like that. So.
If, you know, everything,
Gotcha, right. Yeah.
everything is recycled. Our Earth will be recycled. Our sun will, the whole universe eventually, according to our scientists, is going to disappear someday. So, we'd only
Right.
be postponing the inevitable. And, you know, we don't know if it would be pleasant or not, but I kind of have my doubts.
Yeah, well, that's one of the biggest arguments against transhumanism is the whole point of this idea that death is bad, and that means that we are basically bypassing evolution altogether. And how can that possibly be good? We wouldn't be here if evolution didn't form us to what we are. So, I mean, there's a lot of discussion for that, and I hope we expand on that a little bit more. Kyle, you're up.
Okay, so I don't want to get too tied up just in the idea of immortality, but I do need to touch on it briefly. Death itself is not bad. Death opposed to the will of the individual is what is bad. If you cure aging, which isn't the same as immortal, you can still die. They have a simulation now that if you keep like the death rates for accidents and other ways that people die, the average person would live, I think it was about 10,000 years, and you can play around with those numbers on the site to see what those are for just curing old age. But on top of that, a person should be able to choose when they die. They shouldn't be mandated to live, 110 years. If we can cure old aging and somebody reaches 200 years and they're like, all right, I'm bored, I'm done now, they can choose for their own reasons, not with other people deciding, well, if you don't want to have sex, what's the point? And so, aside from immortality itself, there's an underlying point here about what makes humans human. It's different for different groups of people what exactly it is that they say, oh, I can't do that, I wouldn't be human anymore. I drink these Jimmy Joy Plenty Shakes as like a meal replacement for my meals, and I already have people telling me that I can't do that, that's not human. How are you doing that? People have said this about the development of self-driving cars, that if they can't drive their own car, that they wouldn't feel like they have their humanity or their freedom anymore, which is still separate from the body. Or the artificial womb is an idea that I've discussed this with people before, where if they had their child being grown in a womb separate from themselves, they wouldn't feel human anymore, that the race as a people wouldn't be human anymore. And even with an artificial womb and growing a child in a womb separate from an individual, I'd still find plenty of reason for sex.
I want to ask a question for clarification, specifically to you, but anybody else want to answer this? Has anybody ever heard of an asexual human?
Yes.
Who live perfectly fulfilling lives without sex? Just so you know. It's like-
How about involuntary celibacy?
Yeah. Involuntary celibacy.
That's a terrorist.
Anyway, okay, so Michelle. Oh, Sean, I'm sorry, Sean. My bad.
Going back, by the way, to this conversation. It was in regards to,
Hold on a second. We all pay attention to the speaker, please.
it was in regards to the ethics of transhumanist exclusion, regarding the idea that there is an ethical argument to be made to exclude individuals from transhumanism in the name of resource allocation. There would be not enough food or water supplied in a society in which immortalism is a side effect of transhumanism. And I just wanted to propose that within the construct of transhumanism is the idea that the body itself is malleable enough that we don't need to think on a fixed rate of energy consumption per person, that we would be able to transcend even the necessity of caloric intake and how that would be allocated within the body itself. So we would potentially be able to sustain ourselves on less or even alternative methods of consuming energy, like photosynthesis. There are ways of getting energy into the body that would require us to continue to depend on straight agriculture or farming.
Good points, good points.
Sorry, for
Okay.
clarification, do you know if there is already some research towards that direction? Because most of the documentaries I've seen are not talking about this, which is actually very interesting.
Oh, thanks. The proposal that I have within the underlying premise is that humans don't kill themselves. So in a reality where humanity continues to iterate upon its own existing research over time, I don't see how there could ever be a way where we don't succeed in this, with the exception that it is impossible. So it's like there's a P equal NP sort of problem, where if it's within the realm of solvable problems, and if you give humanity an infinite amount of time, then it will eventually come into existence.
But you don't know of any current research being done towards that goal?
Probably the most far along research that I'm familiar with at this point would be CRISPR. That's CRISPR for anyone unfamiliar. It's an acronym that I cannot tell you what it means.
Clustered regular interspace palindromic repeats.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you probably
Genetic manipulation, it also has a subhelial cascade.
Clarification, does that mean we'd all turn green?
If you wanted to.
Your choice.
Okay, thank you, Sean, that was pretty good. Dan?
Sorry, before I go on, I just think about what I was saying about what's the point of sex then, and I just remember this meme I saw not too long ago.
Would you like an
Said-
explanation?
Huh? Meme I saw not too long ago, but it was basically said something like, why do atheists celebrate Christmas if you don't believe in it? Someone responded, well then what's the point of having sex if you're not trying to reproduce? Because it's fun. So, apologize, just no, just a couple things. When I was watching a TED Talk on this just today, they were talking about how it's almost, things are just going to naturally evolve this way towards transhumanism, because it's like, you look at the, like, they said they did a poll, and like a vast majority of adults don't want the implants and things like that. They were saying, but you look at the children that are being raised, it's like, without a computer, you're almost ostracized, you know, you're not looked at like everyone else. And so they're building, everything's just gonna continually build upon that. And I thought that was actually kind of an interesting point, because it's just the way things go, as the technology moves and younger generations come in. And like, I don't know, I just, like I said, I think we're talking about earlier, I was saying, before this started, we were talking about identity. At what point are you still human? At what point? There's just those questions that come in, and then what kind of things, they said, do you regulate those kinds of things? Do you stop people from doing, I don't know, all kinds of things, but I was just curious about that. And yeah, that's, some of it kind of in a sense reminds me of one of my favorite shows when I was a kid, was X-Men, where you had mutants that evolved and had special abilities, but people were scared of those, and they fought against them, and then they fought, you know, it just kind of brought up the kind of issues that you see. Like, we still have issues amongst ourselves, now we're adding other stuff to it, so, I don't know, just my thoughts on it.
Good point. Okay, Catherine, you're back up again.
All right, so I've seen a lot of response to my earlier assertion that good things are good and bad things are bad, with general notions of like, well, if we were transhumanists, then wouldn't, you know, there be such and such consequence that would be bad. And I think transhumanism is really just much more simple and elementary than that. It's, if you ever find yourself saying, oh, but transhumanism would be bad because of such and such, then you're probably not quite getting it. The core notion is you get good things and avoid bad things, however you want to define good and bad. The idea is that you don't just stop whenever you say, oh, that's unnatural, or oh, that hasn't been done before, or that's weird and unusual or new. Transhumanism is just, let's go ahead and use technology, these new things that we encounter, and do good things with them. There are lots of particular things like, are you antinatalist, or what about population ethics, or should we live in a capitalist society, or there's lots of things like that. But that's all arguing over what is good. Transhumanism just says, that which is good, let's do it, and not be held back by our conservative notions of what is normal.
So clarification, you're saying that, for example, if we obtained the immortality and overpopulation or resource consumption became a problem, that just becomes another target for transhumanism to attempt to find a solution for, if it were actually a problem.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, thank you, Ken. All right, James, you're up again.
So, in relation to immortality, how would our prison systems function with an immortal population? Like, can you really, as a human being, execute a life sentence on someone knowing that they will live forever? Or would you have to cut them off from the technology that allows them to live forever and let them live out their rest of whatever their natural life is? Or how would you execute a death sentence? How would you give them normal, like what would normal sentencing be if you lived 100,000 years? Nowadays we live 100 years and we have 10-year prison sentences. If you lived 100,000 years, would you have a 1,000-year prison sentence?
If I can ask a question for clarification, that kind of maybe answers the question. If I understand where we're going with transhumanism, it would be downloading our consciousness into an AI, and the death sentence would be reprogramming. All right, sorry, Mary McPherson.
Oh, can we get off?
No, not yet, Mary.
Well,
It's Roxanne.
I think it's rather relevant. Can we get off this immortality and get back to something a little more realistic, please?
What's wrong with immortality?
Immortality is realistic.
Yeah.
No.
That actually is the dream of the futurists.
Assume we have-
Actually pushing for transhumanism, that's exactly what they're looking for.
We got a lot more problems between then and forever.
Of course we do.
Let's discuss those problems.
No, we
Assuming
can't
we have
discuss
the ability
that.
to
We're talking
generate
about
consciousness.
transhumanism. Roxanne, you're up.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. As a public health worker, I sometimes, I'm in black pain right now, but I look at what we've done and I see huge disparities longer, and living with immunosuppressed immune systems, compromised, that compromised immune systems because of all this technology and things that we've been getting a hip replacement. I can't do that until I get my sinus infection cleared up, and if you have sinus, you can't, so it's, and you're always gonna have to worry about that. There's a lot to get over, but the main thing is, we're messing with our immune response, we're messing with genetics, and what have we done? We have interfered with evolution, and that's where the disparities are now, and I think this is a great idea. I love it. I wanted it to do like you say, we'll learn from our mistakes as we go. And, if it's bad, it's going to be determined to be such, and we'll redirect. But I'm concerned about getting the resources to those who don't have the opportunities, and making sure that our population that's existing is being fed, and that, those of us who are living so much longer don't live in pain.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, so, Michelle, you're up.
I have several different spatters to share. Catherine mentioned values of good and bad, and I thought that was interesting because what I think is good and bad, somebody else may not think is good and bad. So, and that was in advancement of the technology in order to integrate technology into the physical, biological beings for the artificial intelligence. Another thing that was brought up is the therapeutic and versus enhancement reasons for integrating the artificial intelligence into the biological things. And I thought it was interesting because this morning I watched a video in which somebody who was blind was using a video, a virtual reality tool in order to experience art, sculptures, and they had done all of this. So this person had it. Now, I don't know that it's always an either-or thing, because this person was able to experience this sculpture in a way that I couldn't experience it. And I wonder if I was to use that tool and close my eyes, would I be able to experience that? And that way I don't have the lack of visual stuff like this, but I then could experience it. So it might not be an either-or thing. Another thing that came to mind is the idea as far as intent. When we use artificial intelligence and we incorporate it into a biological being, what is the intent? Could the artificial intelligence be that Trojan horse in order to steer somebody who might not have what I perceive as a good reason for incorporating this artificial intent into a being, so that it might steer somebody in a way that they wanted to be steered, and it may not be for the common good. So while I do like the idea of artificial intelligence, I do think that there's a balance there, and that balance means always we have to check somehow.
Okay.
Can I make just a short announcement? Would everybody please speak up, speak from the diaphragm, because we have a few people here who do have a little bit hard of hearing. Now, did everybody hear me?
Well, if anybody didn't hear you, hear her, put your hand. Okay. Kyle, you're up.
Okay, I wanted to come back to your point about the place at which maybe some of these things would be forced, and kind of combine it with what you were saying about later generations growing up with the technology. And like we see with cell phones pretty much being ubiquitous to everyone, that never needed to be forced at one point. A generation grew up with them. We're seeing this starting to unfold right here in our local area with the self-driving cars, as in Waymo's early testing, they have kids already being taken to school by self-driving vehicles. They're growing up with that technology now. Similarly, I think some of these things won't need to reach a point where they're forced on people, that it may just become the norm for people to do without requiring any sort of obligation on people. Yeah, and then I wanted to kind of bring up some of the more intellectual modifications to people. So currently, things like the cell phones and, let's say, LSD, ways of altering the mind that people either are for or against, they have positive, negative benefits. In particular, the idea that we're going to get better and better at controlling our personality is something that we want to bring up. Like, if there were things about yourself you wanted to change, habits or behaviors or your interests, would you? Could you? Should you? I know I would. If I could take my passion for playing video games and just nudge it a little bit more in the direction of making video games, I would be greatly appreciative of that opportunity. But my interests are a product of an evolutionary path that's more easily satisfy me now than satisfy me long term, and so it's harder for me to break that disparity. So that's something I would change in a heartbeat if I could do it effectively. And I search for ways that I can do it now. So with that intellectual modification comes part of the definition that you gave initially was improving intelligence, but there's a lot of studies currently that some of the things we're doing now are actually having a negative impact on intelligence. Not because the tools themselves are bad, but because the way that we're using them is, a technology can free up your time, but how you spend that time is a different matter. And so it becomes part of another direction of that problem, something to address, like from what you were saying about seeking the good things, is how do we encourage better use of the time these things free up for us? Or instead of just saying, hey, I want to change my personality from playing games to being better creative.
3 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
I had a question.
Yes.
So you're saying you could change something about you, you would, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if you could change something drastic about you, would you still consider yourself you though?
Yes, so, and this is a Ship of Theseus type question, but it was me that made the choice to change, and afterwards I'm part of that same continuation. I mean, those things have certainly happened to me now. I can look back and say, me 10 years ago isn't me now, but me 10 years ago would still consider it me, and that continuation is a single story.
I love it, another philosophy student.
I just have a quick question. I saw nodding over here when you said Ship of Theseus, so I assume it's a meme that I don't understand.
Yeah,
It's
philosophical.
It's a philosophy statement. So if you have the ship named Theseus and you took it apart plank by plank and rebuilt it, like each piece at a time,
As it's sailing around the world.
as it's sailing around the world, but you eventually replace all of the pieces, is it still the same ship?
I didn't know that that's what that was called. I just understood the concept. I
Yeah.
just didn't know what its name was.
Okay, Mary McPherson, you're up.
No, I said it before.
Oh, you already said it? Okay, then Jacqueline, you're up.
So, back up your point, I guess, I've got kind of a question for you. So, in order to go through and make those advancements, you have to do a bunch of stuff wrong in order to get it right. So, arguably, you're gonna create something, you're gonna put it out in the world, you have no idea how it's gonna work, like with cell phones, and, it's potentially going to harm lots of people because it's part of the social experiment. So like, for example, with cell phones, you get the physiological changes of people with poor memory, you get like poor hand-eye coordination because they're not doing other things. You could argue that because you're putting something out in the world that could negatively impact people's lives, it could be a bad idea to go through and start that because you've got this experimental process that could harm people. And like, what if, until you get to that ultimate good, right, how many people are you gonna sacrifice living the bad life?
That's their choice, though. Things are created, that when you use it good or you use it bad, that's a choice.
Chemotherapy.
That and, second point, is there an assumption that everyone has equal access to this?
No,
Because
we get into that discussion.
Major class
I would like to see us
disparities.
get that discussion, that's pretty important.
Can we talk about the class disparities that would happen there? Because even now, like with access to public health care,
Yeah.
we've got major
I was hoping we
disparities.
would get into all the ethical implications of this, absolutely.
Because then you end up, has anyone seen the movie Gattaca?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Stephen Hawking?
bad.
Excellent movie.
Yeah.
It's like a sci-fi movie where there's this one guy who wants to be an astronaut, but he's not genetically modified, so he can't be an astronaut, so he takes the place of someone who is genetically
Still
modified.
speak up. All right, Catherine, again, go ahead.
Okay, 3 things real quick. 2 in defense of immortalism. 1, there's a famous immortalist who said something to the effect of, I hear all these complaints about the negative repercussions of immortality, and frankly, I'm willing to struggle with those issues for as many centuries as it takes. Let's see. The other thing was I want to warn people to be very cautious about generalizing from fictional evidence, saying, oh, it's such and such in this movie, it's just like that. Things appearing in movies make things seem a lot more likely than they actually are. And I didn't take notes, so I forgot the 3rd point. So we'll come to that later.
Okay, so then Teresa, you're up.
Okay, about the prison sentences, I was thinking, wouldn't transhumanism at a minimum try to get rid of criminal behavior? I mean, couldn't you do that, or would that be like taking people's free will away? I don't know, it seems like that would be a goal that might be something like a good idea. And also, I would like to talk about swords, which is something we'll never ever going to say again. But, I think we would have, how could you have people who didn't have these super improvements to their bodies themselves compete with people who did? Wouldn't you have to have transhuman baseball teams and then normal people baseball teams?
They have it in the fitness world now. Fitness physique, where they have the natural test versus the other ones that don't have to be tested for steroid enhancement. They're 2 different competitions.
Also, Senegal competes against other countries like Spain.
I think we have to separate it.
What?
Senegal and Spain compete, so you can't go through it like, say, oh, well, I mean, these people don't have the same resources, right? Sorry, that's not my turn.
And that's not what I would, I mean, you're saying different countries, I'm not saying that, or different resources, like people in Senegal don't get enough to eat and people in Spain do, is that what you're saying? That they shouldn't be able to compete? Wait, because I'm not really asking you that, I'm just, trying to, I'm talking about robots, sort of half robot people being able to compete against people who haven't done anything like that.
They threw Pistorius out, they wouldn't let
entirely
him. Right.
Okay, I don't want to talk about sports, really, I didn't. I'm done.
But actually, the point you're making applies to more than just sports. It applies to a lot of things, yes. Okay, so James, you're up. I got you, Jack.
So, right now in our society, we have certain like religious groups that, and other cultural groups that do not like body modifications, just like my tattoos and stuff. They frown upon that, and they actively speak out against certain things like that. If we were to advance into a transhuman age, do you think that we would have the same types of groups appear, certain cultural groups and religious sects that would pop up and be against, body modifications, against intelligence modifications, against using technology to, just better your life in general?
Yes, I
I think it exists now, yes. Absolutely. Roxanne?
I neglected to make my major point, and that is, right now, if something were to happen where a new virus suddenly emerged, so much of our population in this world is wiped out because we haven't dealt with the basics.
That's right.
And that's the genetic component. And actually, I think some of the underdeveloped countries will probably live better because their immune response is going to be better because they're not being immune compromised by steroids and other medications and treatments that we're all undergoing right now here because we can't. So maybe that would be the best thing, wipe us all out. Those of us who have so much, but that was basically what I wanted to say. I like the genetic part of it if that's what we're going to, but I think we need, if we're going to put money into the country or the world, we should be focusing on improving humanity.
Okay, Okay, good, thank you. Katya, you're up.
I wanted to go back to the discussion about the norm and when the norm becomes mandatory. And I know there is a whole range in between, in the sense that, yes, like cell phone, yes, they've become the norm, as we were saying, people have elected to use it and have it all the time. But what's already our perception of people, if someone tells you, I don't have a cell phone, aren't you already looking at them like, hey, who are you? You don't have a cell phone? I cannot reach you? And it's going to get there where it becomes so much the norm that people are going to react and say, okay, now everybody's enhanced, if nobody needs any medical procedures. So if all of a sudden somebody has decided not to be enhanced, and all of a sudden say, oh, I need to take 1 week off to do my treatment, no, why not? Take that on your own time. Everybody's enhanced, you shouldn't be doing that. And that when it's become, that norm becomes so omnipresent that it will become mandatory. Everybody will be at one point
I have
obliged
a question.
to do it.
I have a question. Don't you think if we get to that point, medicine would be eliminated, medical practice?
But that's the point. I mean, don't forget, if we say at the beginning it's a norm and you still have the choice, it becomes a norm because so many people do it, then medicine, you wouldn't need all these procedures. But what about the people who decided not to be enhanced?
The medicine would
If
be
the medicine will not be
available.
available anymore, and then that's it, then it becomes mandatory.
Haven't we got this
Wait,
with
hang on a second, let's keep it in order. Let's keep it in order, please, let's do that.
So
All right, Andrea,
Question.
Yes.
Don't you think that the society's always gonna be divided, going back to what James was saying? I mean, you're going to always have people that are going to choose to opt out.
Absolutely, and I can recommend a really good book from Nancy Press called Spaniards, Beggars in Spain, where it's exactly this. You can have an enhancement where human would not need to sleep at all. And just with that little enhancement, you arrived at this dichotomy in society where you have people who decided, okay, no, I still want to sleep, and the one who don't need to sleep. And then of course they can be more productive, they can do so much more things. And what do you do then? I mean, then that book talks about that. I mean, how do you accept this dichotomy? How do you deal with it?
I really do hope that we get into the ethical aspects, Jacqueline, that you were talking about, because we're starting to poke at it, and I want to see us go there. I really do. Okay, so Andrea, you're up.
Okay, so I know like one of the things I could think about is like we keep talking about like all these enhancements and all the different things we can do with technology. I know one of it was saying, you know, if we're gonna babies, you can do a baby outside the womb. But we're missing that what makes us human and like, you know, eliminating pain and joy and love, those are all human, and when you start to get rid of those, I mean, the one things that help babies survive is moms go through that pain, you know, and we still populate after it because we have this hormones that release that help us forget what that pain was to give us that joy. So pain is also a teacher. I mean, you work with little children, you learn that pain teaches them, but so does that joy. So with all the enhancements that transhumanism would give us, are we going to lose what makes us human because we're going to lose that element of joy and pain?
Good, thank you. All right, Kyle, you're back up.
To that point, it is called transhumanism for a reason. It is there's, like as I mentioned earlier, there's a different point for every person as to where we're no longer human. There's probably a more strict scientific line, but I'm less concerned with whether or not I'm human and more concerned with what options I have as a free living individual. So to the point of the artificial womb, I support it as an option for, you know, people who don't have the ability to give birth themselves, people who choose it because they want it to be safer for their child because it's, you know, maybe more secure at some point than natural birth, but only ever as an option. I don't support that one as something that ever becomes mandatory. Back to the point of mandatory things that may occur. It's a lot harder, particularly in the medical industry. Vaccinations was a good example of this. So when it comes to medical, I think that's a much more difficult conversation. But when it comes to things like cell phone, the peer pressure of somebody saying, oh, you don't have a cell phone, what's wrong with you? I know people that take pride in that don't have cell phones, that are like, yeah, fine, whatever. So I'm not as opposed to that. That peer pressure I don't see as a statement of now it's mandatory. Then back to prisons really quick. I think it kind of dives down to a different path, but the prison systems as a whole need a reform towards better methods of reform than just incarceration. So life sentences is an interesting question, but ties way too closely into the issue of reform to go way down a rabbit hole off subject. So I did want to acknowledge it as a good point. And I think that was all I had at this point.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Dan?
Actually, I'm gonna skip my turn off.
Okay,
Unless
Jack,
you wanna,
bring it
unless
back
you
up
wanna.
again.
Okay, so, I mean, we're talking about that more immortality idea, right? And I think we're making some assumptions about the nature of humanity when we're talking about that. Like, the assumption is it's productive, it would be a good thing. How many people actually, like, do things that benefit them or the world with their time all the time? Like, how much time does everyone waste on YouTube, on Netflix? And, I mean, like, as a society, we've got so many resources available to us now, and we're moving toward being a more service-based, entertainment-driven society. So you give people infinite time, it's not gonna change basic human instincts, right? I mean, if you go through and you genetically modify out basic human instincts, then you're really removing something human, so you can't even consider that as something transhumanism would fix, right? So we've got a problem there. Does that make sense?
Question, are you basically talking about like what's gonna be people's motivations if they can live forever kind of thing?
More like, I'm making the claim that seeking pleasure, easily seeking pleasure, is an inherent part of being human. And if you go through and you attempt to improve the nature of humanity with transhumanism, you can't engineer out that part because it's a key piece of being human. Therefore, transhumanism might be a bad thing because you give people infinite access to entertainment, and it doesn't produce anything.
Okay. And then Catherine, you're up again, is that right? Did you? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So I wanted to maybe try to shift the discussion a little bit toward things that are relevant now. Like, so I have three things here. One was the thing that I forgot earlier, was that immortality is actually relevant now because we have the technology of cryonics. That is something that exists now and can be used. And if you threw a little bit more money on it, if you're currently not satisfied with the technology we have now, you could throw a little bit more money on it and maybe we could get something better than vitrification. So this is a very near-term kind of thing. Another near-term thing that is transhumanism relevant, and this is kind of self-serving, but there are a lot of people who say, you know, yay for body modification, yay for having the freedom to modify yourself. And then transgender people show up and say, hi, I exist. And then they're like, oh no, not like that. So that's another more present day relevant transhumanist issue. And then the last thing is eugenics. People will abort babies that might have certain diseases that you don't want. And this is, whether we should or shouldn't do it or how we should do it, is yet another transhumanist issue that is relevant today and soon in the near future.
Okay. Sean? Go ahead.
Just one sentence. Do you support eugenics or please
So if we had the technology to, say, create a human being who was exactly the same as a regular human being, only was capable of experiencing much more joy than before, you could try to classify that as eugenics. Most people do not like eugenics of any form, so if you do try to expand the definition to include that, then people wouldn't like you. So that which is classically eugenics, you know, like aborting people because they have the wrong race or something, that is clearly bad. I think that is horrible. but creating post-humans from birth, making these humans that are happier and healthier and smarter or better, just because we have the technology to do so. I'm a little iffy on that, but it seems like it could be a good idea.
And can I clarify? So eugenism is a set of beliefs and practices that aims at improving the genetic quality of the human population. And you have positive eugenics, which is to push for higher rates of sexual reproduction among people with desired traits, as opposed to negative eugenics, which is try to minimize the rates of reproduction for people who have less desired traits. And there comes the definition, what's a desire and a less desired trait. So I just wanted to point out.
Right. Yeah. Okay, Joe, you're up.
Yeah, I also wanted to.
Do you have a question?
It was my turn, and then she jumped in with a comment.
My bad. Sorry, Sean, you're up. Good point. Thank you for calling me on that.
I have that one here. I was trying to remember the subject of that one too. I'll circle back around to that, but I wanted to come back onto this idea of, we were talking about the idea of, we're focused on eugenics. On the topic of eugenics, I just wanted to propose as my main point that in a world in which eugenics exists, but also transhumanism is available to anyone, that there's a world of equality of access to anyone upon choice, I think that the question of eugenics becomes moot, because any modification that is made in the womb to a person who is born into a transhumanist world will then be able to have the ability to make a choice for themselves as to whether or not they want to continue to live with any choices that were compelled upon them, or they were able to start making choices for themselves. So even if we chose to put a person into the world with a greater capacity for joy, they could maybe reach a point where they recognize that there are situations where that acts as an impediment and it has some consequences, but because transhumanist options are available to them, they'll be able to intentionally remove that from themselves at that point. So the idea that we can impose our ideology on others in a world in which everyone has access to transhumanist resources becomes somewhat impossible, because everyone will have the agency to choose for themselves how they want to move through the communal reality. Which then brings into the question, going back into prisons, how do you hold people accountable in that sort of world? And I think this is where we get into a question of whether or not in a transhumanist world we will still recognize human beings to have free will at all. The reason I propose this is because if transhumanism provides, let's say, unlimited insight, unlimited rapid growth of intelligence and understanding, and we're able to process information faster and faster, we begin to approach a point where every individual being becomes all-knowing, all-understanding, and all-seeing. And this includes not just having insight into what's happening environmentally, but also internally, chemically. Earlier it was mentioned pain and happiness. These are teachers, but these are also chemical reactions that occur within the body. And these are all reactions to what's happening environmentally. So if you have unlimited insight into what's happening to a person chemically, you have unlimited insight into what's happening around them environmentally, and you have unlimited insight into what's happening contextually, can we hold people accountable to any action at that point when we have the complete ability to understand why every action was performed in a sort of chain reaction where it almost seems as though, if you look at time backwards, every outcome becomes inevitable.
I still have a question for clarification. How do you perceive that we would ever have equal access?
So my proposal for equal access begins with, this is a pretty big question, but it would actually begin with, it's a bit of a long answer.
Okay, well, we'll move on then.
Yeah.
I want people to think about that, because that actually is one of the most important ethical questions I hope we're going to get into here. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I will. Sean, it's all right. Have you put your name down again?
did go in for a procedure to attempt to nudge your personality to be better at making video games, but instead you wound up a violent sociopath who would be, assuming you're not already, that's quite the assumption, who would then be responsible for your actions after that point? Is it you because you're the one acting out? Is it you because you made the choice to undergo this procedure, or is it someone else? Likewise, someone else at the other end of the spectrum brought up self-driving cars, especially in the context of choice and availability. Suppose that a human driver, acting as a normal human driver, winds up causing an accident that a self-driving car would have been able to avoid. Is that person then responsible for not using a self-driving car? So those are some points that I wanted to bring up because they're more, because I feel like they probably will happen.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, Richard, you're up.
I'm going to kind of throw a grenade into our conversation here, so I apologize to begin with. So transhumanisms, I've got 2 points I want to bring up. One of them is, if you have some, I think this is a classic philosophical question, if you have a way of enhancing yourself, but it reduces your lifespan. So you now have the choice of saying, okay, I want to double my intelligence, but it's going to halve my lifespan. And we kind of have that already, performance-enhancing drugs for athletes. They're reducing their lifespan by improving their athletic performance. Should we allow for that kind of behavior? It seems like under transhumanism, based on what Catherine was saying, is the answer should be it's up to the personal choice. And since there's no good or bad, except that now I'm personally enhanced, I should, if I want to double my intelligence, I should go for it. I'm ready to go. The other question that comes up, say I've got, going back to sort of immortality, say I figured out, oh, I've got a development that will allow me to extend my lifespan, and I'm going to use that development, and because I get to increase my lifespan, everyone should want this, so I'm going to release this as some sort of virus to the system. And now we find out that, oh, it increases certain people's lifespans, but it decreases other people, or just out and out kills other people. Was that a good choice?
We have that now.
Yeah. Okay, Mary McPherson. Gotcha, Karen.
Vaccinations, they're more or less mandatory, and the people who don't choose it are causing the rest of our children problems. So that's a place where non-choice or choice in the negative is not good. And this other thing about people with Bluetooth and walking around talking to the air all the time and not paying any attention to anything else, that's different than the cell phones. But to hear people walking around and think, oh, hello, you don't know whether it's you or who it's to. I mean, it's some world right now.
Roy, you're up.
Someone mentioned being able to be more productive, and I question is that going to be possible if most or all tasks are done by robots? What kind of an economy is a world like that going to have? How will things function economically? How will we be able to pay for anything, or will we have some totally different kind of system? Just a thought that popped into my mind.
Okay, all right. Karen?
Actually, that was my topic too. What's going to happen to the economy? Is there a need for money? How will people make a living?
Okay, actually, I meant Karen K. but
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Was that your point?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just was throwing that out.
Okay.
In response to what you said.
So, Karen K.
I just wanted to thank everybody for the discussion, because
because this is a brand new subject for me. And I'm very interested in finding out really what is possible now and what are we doing now. And so I got to thinking a little bit about that, and I think my little 3 minutes is gonna go in a circle here. When Andrea mentioned the joy versus pain and that expression of humanity, I thought about what are we really trying to do with this new technology, the idea of immortality in a transhuman body, not in a human body, but in a transhuman body. And I'm thinking, well, this started maybe with trying to improve health for people and resolve some problems and make life a little easier and more enjoyable. But I'm thinking too that there's an aspect of it with us wanting to find solutions for living beyond this planet. And why is that? Well, I think it's because we're trying to avoid the pain of the death of our planet. We don't want to be here when that dies. We want to be somewhere else, so we avoid that pain of loss and pain of suffering, physical suffering and pain of loss. So I'm thinking that we're trying to evolve to a place of no pain. Maybe we'd like to become robotic so that wherever we go, we'll be able to get there without loss of life. We can have astronauts that, you know, physically are robotic so that they can go anywhere they want and they can survive in any kind of environment. And then when that world dies, or if they ever get caught up in a place that dies, there's no pain. There's no pain to the death. There's no pain to the loss, because they are transhuman, they are not. And so I'm thinking, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, I'm just thinking, where did this start? What was the impetus for becoming transhuman? You know, I'm thinking it was with the medical world, with cryogenics. It's trying to survive until there's a cure for your disease. I get that. I experienced that myself, not cryogenically, but waiting for a cure for a disease. And it does happen. So I get it. You know, that makes sense. But on the bigger picture, I'm looking at this, what as humanity are we trying to do with science? What are we trying to do with space exploration? Why are we out there? Is it to avoid pain?
Okay, thank you. Aaron, that was good. All right, Chet, you're up.
Yeah, well, you know, I was listening to all this and I was thinking, what does any of this have to do with happiness? You know, if there was no pain, there would be no pleasure. I mean, that's the game of life. Nature rewards us for being true to life with happiness. And so, if we are suffering, if our culture is suffering, that the message is plain to nature, we're not being true to life. And so does becoming transhuman get us more true to life? If it does, we will be happier. I don't think it will. You know, they take like our people who live forever happier than the ones who don't. You see, a lot of soldiers report they're fearful when they go to war, and they have fear after. But a lot of times in the middle of combat, they have an amazing experience. They're not afraid of dying. And it's the most remarkable experience they ever had. I think we need to be looking at more about what's going on in our world that makes us afraid of dying than figuring out how to live forever.
Okay, James, you're up.
So when we start modifying our bodies genetically, and we make genetic modifications to our, you know, strength, our intelligence, our aggressiveness, certain genetic factors, what would happen when we get to a point where we can no longer control the genetic modifications we've made to ourselves, or those genetic modifications make us something superior to humans? Like us as humans, we see inferior animals, monkeys, stuff like that. They're intelligent, but inferior to us. And we, colonize our entire civilization, through them. We've moved them to make our roads. We've moved, inferior civilizations to build our communities. Would a superior force to us try to colonize around us and civilize around us, or would they civilize through us and push us out of the way?
Good point.
The monkeys don't
Okay,
think
Kyle.
there's
Kyle, you're up.
superior.
This is gonna try to be a packed 3 minutes. All right. To the point of free will, I would say that we can say now pretty definitively that people don't have free will, and we can still hold people responsible for their actions for points of deterrence and other reasons that goes down a whole tangent to the side. But I don't think that's an issue for transhumanism. I think that's an issue today that we debate pretty vigorously. To 2 points, the value of human life was brought up earlier in terms of life extension, and also kind of just now in terms of happiness with life extension. And I want to bring that back to a point I made earlier about how some technologies free up time for us. They free up more time for us to do things. What we do with that time that gives value to that time of our life is a separate issue. And yeah, we should be working to have a valuable life. That's part of why I'm here having this discussion, because I figured a good intellectual conversation with people would add value to my life. But I'm not always going to want to do things that I think add value to my life. I like my YouTube videos. Experimentation, and particularly responsibility for mistakes, is another part that came into that. I think that for the most part, adults should be able to choose whether they want to be experiments in something that's going on. It's a point of free will. In terms of people getting paid for it, we get a problem with people in poverty doing it out of a necessity to survive, which becomes more of a dilemma that's harder to justify. They really don't have a choice at that point, which, so long as it's an actual choice that they're making as a free person, not just mandated for the method of survival, I'm fine with it. It's a little more iffy on the economic side of it. But if, on the other hand, they were saying this is a complete product, we know we can turn your personality to one that's more focused at your desires, but then I become a homicidal maniac, like a lot of products now, they should take on a responsibility for what changes that they made if it didn't go to what they promised it would, outside of the realm of experiment, where I acknowledge that there's possible side effects that were unknown. And this ties into trade-offs as well. If I wanted to be smarter but half my life, that's a choice that I make, that I'm trying to improve the quality of the life that I'm living the way that I want to live it. So those trade-offs are good and acceptable so long as they're optional, which becomes a problem when people have to take on intellectual advancements in order to compete with artificial intelligence in the workforce, because those enhancements are going to be the way that people continue to compete. Particularly, they showed after some of the first AIs beat chess players, a human player paired with a computer was able to beat the AI. So like that symbiotic relation worked for a while. It doesn't now, the AI beats that too. But moving forward, there's an argument that the way that humans are going to continue to compete in the economy is symbiotic.
Good, thank you. All right, Nancy.
Okay, just a couple words from your friendly historian. I'm gonna try to be nice about this. My friend, I looked on this as something new, until I started reading through all this stuff. All historians know about eugenics, and that's the big red flag. We all need to think about that and not think, oh, what a nice thing it would be to be more intelligent or whatever. Read about eugenics and what that led to, forced sterilizations and all kinds of, and what Hitler did, and I'm not gonna go into that. But all historians are familiar with things like futurism and technology worship and such. So what I didn't realize is that transhumanism is a catch-all word for a big collection of ideas, all kinds of ideas. And I looked on Wiki, and I would never use that for serious research, but for this I looked on it. And it was, no, seriously, it's not a good source. But for this, it's fine. It's interesting and helpful and convenient. But they have even invented a word for those of us who reject these things, humanish. And Amish, it's insulting for one thing, and for another thing, it's misinformed, because we're from central Illinois, and I have seen Amish people drive cars, use ATMs, use engines, and so on and so on. So they're ignorant as far as the Amish. And I don't want to be called humanish, it's insulting. That's my 2 cents.
Well, very good, thank you. Okay, Sean, you're up.
So this was coming back around to a question earlier as to how do we provide equality of access to transhumanist resources? And I think this is a great question because it calls into question the privatization of transhumanist resources and disbursement of them. The question I had gotten earlier was how do we ensure that there is equality of access and that people will have it? I think that there are a couple of different ways to go about it. One would be through centralized disbursement. That could be something that happens through government, a public option of some sort. And I think that the other option would be a free market solution, which would basically be a commodification, turning transhumanism into a product. What I would propose is that the ultimate outcome of transhumanism would be that for private organizations, there could be made an incentive to them to begin propagating transhumanism in order to create lines of recurring revenue for themselves, which it would be similar to giving away cell phone or giving away smartphones because you know that they're going to consume so many apps over their lifetime that eventually the smartphone becomes a loss leader, but it will end up paying for itself in time. If transhumanism if it doesn't have a form of public oversight and obligation and accountability attached to it, then what I would foresee end up happening is that private corporations end up owning the means to which people can achieve transhumanism, but that would come with the side effect of perpetuating an ongoing incentive for the corporation to accumulate capital over the long term, which calls into question the ethics of if private corporations are able to enable transhumanism, what is there to prevent them from creating transhumanist addictions? Things that you need to continue to get and sustain your transhumanist lifestyle indefinitely.
Good point.
Other questions?
One of the ethical questions that I was concerned with.
Okay.
On the privatization point, would they also, those who be part of the corporations, would they also be programming that in spite of what you yourself as a human being at that point in time would like to have? Would they also program that?
That's a great question. So the question being, if someone else is facilitating transhumanism for you, how much control do you really have over the outcome of what it is that they are putting in you? And it's the question of, especially if it's going to be modifying your intelligence or modifying your perception of reality, what is there to prevent a private corporation from saying that they're giving you an enhancement when they're really only giving you the illusion, the self-delusion that the enhancement has been provided? Your intelligence is higher now. Oh, great. I'll take your word for that. Things that are unquantifiable. That's a really good question because how does one know that they have provided enough insight that a person can understand even what require us to begin to have a public discussion, because it's going to require us as a community to bargain with those that will be privatizing the transhumanist resources up front, in order for us to regulate to what degree we demand to have insight and oversight over how this is implemented and what the long-term effects of that are.
Okay, so we actually have less than 30 minutes left, and I have 10 people's names on the list, so we're gonna have to be efficient so we can get through this. Just so everybody knows, Catherine, you're up, go ahead.
Oh, I'm not? Nice. So I was going to, someone talked about the question of whether enhancements will become mandatory, or whether it would be a good idea to force everybody to be immortal or something like that. And the thing is, I tend to find that people who are immortalist also tend to be in favor of suicide rights. As in, if you have a horrible terminal disease and you're suffering, the idea is you should be able to have the right to choose to die rather than suffer for as long as humanly possible, which seems counterintuitive. You'd think people would be pro-death or pro-life one way or the other, but there's like, at the face of it, this inconsistency. And I think the reason for that is that it's just this idea of you should die exactly when you want to, no sooner, no later. That seems like a nice notion to me.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, Karen Kay, you're up, yeah.
I was just hoping to get a little response, I guess, to my question about how this really started. What are we really after? What is the main goal? Is it really immortality? And if so, is that so that we become, that we are beings without pain? You mentioned something about the people in war often find themselves in the midst of battle, not afraid to die. And I thought, yeah, why would we want to become immortal? Are we afraid to die? Are we afraid of pain? Is it fear? What is causing this drive? You know, I understand a certain level of human enhancement, but to go immortal or go to a robotic state, I'm not quite sure I understand the drive. What is the human drive? Just because we can do something? Is that the toying with our brains that we just want to play? Just because we can do this? I really want to understand the goal, and maybe there are more than one, but is it really that we're afraid of something? Is that what's driving this? I'm not understanding that, so I'd kind of like a response.
Yeah, see if we can, see if somebody can come up with that. Roy, you're up.
Well, one of the items is an energy source. Somebody mentioned about going to other worlds, which takes a long time, even the speed of light. What kind of energy is this enhanced human going to be needing in order to survive? And because everything is a recycling center. When you eat something, you're recycling energy of some kind, and you're throwing off an energy source for other things. And would we be reconstituting these things and just continually, consuming over and over again, or what? I think that's a big problem that we have to overcome. And also, as far as happiness or this kind of thing, I find myself doing stuff makes me happy. I like to play with trains, and I enjoy planning, building things, doing things with my hands, and also using my brain to solve problems. This is happiness. The fact that you have to earn a living so you can survive and all this is something we have to do, but it's not the fun part. So, and everyone has their own ideas of what they like to do. Most of us have hobbies. So there's another aspect of what are we going to be doing if we don't have to worry about, dying. I'm sure I'm going to miss this place, but,
when I first started working in, we had to take all these reports and type them in hand by hand, and physicians would have to report to the county report to the state reports to CDC, and now it's like one person enters it, it's populated. So we were promised, with technology, everybody that it would give us all free time. How many people really feel like they have free time? And why aren't we, when all of this has gone on, why are we working?
Yeah.
I was working 50, 60 hours a week. Why? And that seems to be the trend in anybody I talk to. It seems like we're working harder and longer.
Right on.
And where's the money going for all this technology instead of giving us the extra days off or the months of vacation like they have in Europe? It's going up and up and up, and that's what I think is a big thing that we have to consider. And you talk about cryogenics, it's like, when I found happiness, really, is when I accepted in the way this is the way it is, and I will accept it, and, maybe 1,000 years from now, we can do this. But cryogenics, if it's privately funded, not taken from, and the corporations are paying their fair share of taxes, everybody's paying their fair share of taxes, and they're not hiding money so that the rest of the world can enjoy life just by eating maybe once a day, that would be nice. So that's about, another thing. What happens right now if we lose all our electricity? Does anybody know how to make all these calculations to do what technology is doing right now?
Question, for clarification,
Okay.
is cryogenics really proven? Has anybody ever come back after they've been frozen? I think it's a problem still being formulated. It is not an experiment that has come to a satisfactory conclusion yet.
Also, as a senior citizen, I accept the fact that I'm going to die.
Here.
And I appreciate, and I don't want to be taking, just to live away from those who are struggling. I am so lucky to be able to have what I have. So there.
Right.
Very good, thank you. All right, Joe, you're up.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up 2 points. One is that it sounds like we've focused a lot on issues of choice and free will, but it also sounds like a lot of the enhancements and things that we've discussed and modifications are things that would mostly affect or be done to children or those in the womb or those who haven't been born yet in the case of some sort of genetic modification. So how does that change the equation and change how we think about this? And the other point that I wanted to bring up is that someone had addressed class, which is a really important issue because historically, whenever there's any sort of new technology or new medical change, it's the wealthiest among us who can access that first. However, I wanted to point out, one of the things that's constantly being done to address poverty is education. The theory being that if you give people more of an education, they can then become more productive workers, command higher wages, and that's the best way to address poverty. And isn't this just a really, really extreme form of that?
Okay. Kyle, go ahead.
So, life extensions or any modifications in space exploration are not the result of fleeing death or fleeing pain. We're explorative, curious creatures. We want to explore the universe for the same reasons we wanted to explore the seas. We want to see what's out there. We want to see the world. We want to live everywhere. I want to do more things than I have time to do in the current human lifespan. I don't fear death. I fear not living all of the things that I have in my head. I would have been a biologist if I wasn't so pessimistic about the amount of time that experiments take versus the lifespan of people. I read about scientists whose work wasn't vindicated until after their death, and that horrifies me. And granted, there's a lot of people that are better people than me for going like, all right, I might not be vindicated till after I die, but I'm going to contribute. That's not me. Maybe I could modify that. But so all that said, I disagree with the idea that pleasure requires pain. I think there's a whole spectrum of pleasure through neutral to pain, and you could eliminate pain and still have a difference between me sitting around doing nothing and me sitting and going out and doing something that I enjoy. So, while I don't think I don't think that we should eliminate pain altogether. There's, I think, valuable use for pain. I disagree that it's required for pleasure. And on the equality of access for people, there's an interesting point here in that, as I touched on a little bit earlier, people are getting an advantage on an economic front from getting these enhancements first. There was a discussion briefly on the idea of people getting access to information easier. An example would be, say, a brain implant that was the equivalent of your phone, but suddenly you had access to the internet over your thoughts. The people who get that sort of technology first are likely to have an advantage that puts them on par with the AIs of the time that they're working with, and it may help to enhance the problem of the class divide on an economic level. So it is going to be an interesting development.
Yep. Agree with that. Kay, go for it.
Okay, I'm quite sure I have less of a depth of understanding of this topic than anybody in the room. From everything that I've heard and read, it seems to be divided into, like a computer. You're either a hardware person or a software person. And I have a friend who's definitely he's hardware. Okay. Anything that would be genetically done would have to be chosen by the parents or by somebody else before this child is born. So once they're born, would there be the capability to have an increase of intelligence or any of these other wonderful attributes without having mechanical help? Obviously, the mechanical part, for lack of a better term, could be done at any time in anyone's life, more likely. But I guess I wish I had more of a real understanding of it. But it just seems like it's two entirely different things. Either it's done before you're born, unless somebody knows differently, or it's done afterwards.
Where the money goes there.
Transhumanism is, I've been reading it, is basically a combination of the two. We haven't really talked much about genetic modifications yet, but yeah, that's part of transhumanism. All right, Jack, let's go for it.
Let's see, hold on, I've got notes. So back to the question of like transhumanism and its goal, I'd agree with what you said about how it's not pain motivated at all, right? Even companies that sell morphine don't do it to go through and get rid of pain. It's an exploratory or monetary goal. As far as the whole concept of transhumanism, I'd say that most of the people in this room probably benefited from it to some degree, because I would argue, half of the people here wear glasses, maybe more. I'm like really pro wearing glasses, it's the best thing ever. So if we could all make it so that everyone had perfect vision right away, I'd be like, yeah, I'm on board with that. And then I have one last point. Someone over here had talked about how it would be privatized and there'd be an issue with equality of access. The way technology is distributed in every country is it's limited by governments. So it would never run into an issue of corporations having that control. It would be a government-controlled issue, because even today, the government controls what we are allowed to put on the market. So if you're a defense contractor company, what you can sell to another country, the State Department controls that.
Don't let your avoidance go into the rabbit hole. What you just said just triggered a lot of people. We'd be getting off topic if we went down that path. Maybe we'll talk about that at lunch. That could be another topic, yeah. Andrea, you're up.
I know one thing, like we keep talking about like the transhumanism spying on me. I've got a cell phone, they know everything I'm doing.
Yeah.
So when we allow the technology to be inserted into our bodies, when do we get to say the point that this is not going to be controlling me? And then if we do a fail-safe, what is that fail-safe gonna mean? So, yeah, because I mean, we always go through like the whole, I always go, the history part is that we always tend to have somebody who's going to try to find and manipulate and control others. Well, if we're allowing technology into our bodies, there is that sense that one day it could control us. And then who is controlling us? Is it a government that ends up, a private company? Or is it gonna be an AI that controls?
Right.
So.
Excellent.
Kim? Okay, Katya, you're up again.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring you back to what's being done today from a scientific standpoint, and I was amazed to see on videos, we're talking about genetic engineering, where we can already reprogram cells. That has been done already since 2000. We're talking about cellular engineering, where we've been regenerating tissues starting from other cells. That has been done already since 2008. And then there is engineering at the level of the actual tissue, and we actually already able since 2016 to actually fabricate entire organ like a larynx. 2016, that's already 2 years ago. So just wanted to bring that up to what's being done in scientific field today. Back to transhumanism, really there are 4 fields being looked into. There is cognitive science and AI, integrated chips. This is already kind of happening. You're seeing a lot of prosthesis being done where it's actually linked straight to the brain and the signals from the brain, and you can already direct what your arms and your prosthesis can do. You have also modification of the genome. We've identified our genome, we sequenced our genome already. We are already down the path to modify it. And then there's a 4th piece with this bio surgery where you can actually sequence, not only sequence, but cut pieces of your DNA and modify it. So just wanted to bring that on part of the discussion of what's already being looked into from a scientific standpoint. Now bring back to a little bit of ethics and how you legislate all of that. And I think it's part of the same issue and challenges we're seeing as when we're talking about the new disrupting technology with Uber, Airbnb. We don't know what to do with those. The problem with all the evolution we're doing in terms of science is it evolves so quickly that to keep up with it, it's really hard from a legislation standpoint. It's extremely technical. You really have to know and be really informed in that field to be able to understand all the implications to make a law out of it. And also, what are you going to do? Because if you can put a legislation in place in one country, but then that legislation is not being is not the same in other countries. So if, for example, in France you cannot choose the sex of a baby, well, you can go to another country and then you can do it. So how are you going to do that? That's it.
Okay, Roxanne, you're up again.
Okay, I got 2 things real quick. Government our government corporations have been effectively given the right to vote, and so they're probably the ones who will be controlling how technology is distributed. The other thing is behavioral change theory. There's tons of it out there and lots of research that supports that unless you're hurt, you're not going to change. So that's all.
Okay.
Unless you're what?
Unless you're hurt or go through pain, and severe pain a lot of times.
Okay, Maria, you got anything you want to add? I'm going to call on people that raise their hand yet. I'm just curious. Nothing? Stephen, Nancy, anything you want to add?
I mean, I'm not really certain for all of it, but I just feel like we're kind of making it seem like a separate issue for transhumanism versus other technologies. But to me, it seems like one kind of issue that we're kind of just looking almost too forward, and I kind of feel like we've had a lot of these problems with every technology that's ever been made. Like, you start out with a little raft because you want to get from one area to another, but you don't think about the implications of a battleship. And I kind of think, I've put my cards on the table, I think I'm probably pro it, and I kind of understand that there's just some negative consequences you're going to have to deal with, but it's
I don't think not doing it is the right answer. You just go forward and then deal with consequences as they come.
We'll see. Okay, Diana, did you want to add anything? Okay, Marty. What's that?
Well, it was just limited to 10 people.
Yeah, well, we actually.
Yeah, I had a lot of things in mind, but I'd like to keep listening. But, yeah, I come here with, I just finished the Sapiens book the other day. I don't know if you're familiar with the history of, brief history of humankind, going back to, it was like 300,000 years ago since we had fire, about 70,000 since language, and we're only 500 years into the scientific revolution, which has changed the world. So, there's a lot of, like a lot of the things, like you talk about immortality, there's a lot of Hollywood things I like. I don't know if you're familiar with the words Who is Zardoz, Sean Connery. A long time ago, but it was basically a group where the people had attained immortality, but they were tired of it. They wanted to die. so they arranged it so that they could all get killed. And then you got your opposite with Logan's Run, where everybody got terminated.
Third. In time. In time.
Evolutionary humanism is something you might want to Google too, which is a subject to touch on there. We're deciding, because if the main group is going to go on to this higher level or whatever, what happens to the old group? They end up going extinct. That's basically the history of the Earth. For a billion years, we had one-celled organisms. Before there was anything with more than one cell. Once they took off.
Yeah.
It's an interesting book. I highly recommend it.
Okay. Sapiens.
Costco for $14.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris, you want to add anything?
Good discussion, I have nothing really to add right now, good
Okay.
discussion.
Anita?
I've just had so many thoughts going through my head, most of them have been touched on land of people. I just think it's a scary proposition, and I think it's something for the coming generations. I think being the ultimate pessimist, us older folk are gonna die off and it won't matter to us. But science is progressing. I don't see any way of stopping it, unless, of course, the world is destroyed within the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the
Optimistic with you.
Pam, you want to add anything? Yeah.
I think that it's a fascinating subject. Sorry, I was bombarded. There's a lot to think about. But one of the things that comes to mind is the topic of antibiotics, because I can remember a court case, and I don't remember the names of anything, where we went from where we did not have antibiotics, and then when we did, we extended people's lifespan, and they seemed to make good use of their extension of their life, I think, with the amount of years we've added. And I also know that people were brought to trial because they chose not to use antibiotics. If somebody brought up about the fact that we went from not having them at all to maybe only certain people having access, and then now I hope that there is more access to antibiotics, but I don't know that data. And then to where people are actually tried and convicted of whether it's murder or some kind of
Negligent.
Negligent what?
Negligent manslaughter or
Yeah,
something along
because
that
they
line.
chose not to give their child an antibiotic that would save their life. So I wonder, things like stem cell therapy, antibiotics, what about artificial limbs? I think we're dealing with this now. And there are a lot of ethical questions. There are bioethicists, as people who spend their time. I mean, it's happening right now. There's a lot of good that comes, and I think Catherine said, and there's a lot of people who will take advantage, and there's a lot to be worked out. But it's here, it's happening, and I'm glad we're talking about it.
Okay, good, thank you. Jen, you want to add anything at all?
I wanted to, with the decay, you're bringing up some of the different
I don't think hardly anybody here is gonna boo you, but. I don't think so. All right. So, Vici, you wanna say anything?
Yeah, but I got like 30 seconds.
That's right. If that.
Things to think about. I'll just throw them out there because I don't have time. What creates criminal behavior? We all know if you took a baby at birth and put it in a different circumstance, you would get a different person. So when we're manipulating circumstances, there's a possibility the whole criminal system would not exist. Religion. What creates religion? The need to control and get money. So if you went extremely, where we're all post-human, there wouldn't be any need for religion because it wouldn't be to control or to gain money. You very young people probably have not read Brave New World by Huxley, but I really recommend it. And that's it.
Okay, good. We're out of time.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, that's it. It worked out perfectly. Sorry for those that I didn't get to. There's a few people here that didn't get a chance to speak. He shouldn't say anything, and Virginia didn't get a chance to speak. Sorry about that. Gosh, this is a huge crowd. This is pretty good. All right, so what we're gonna do now, I wanna try to go around the room, so everybody's gonna get a chance to say something now. I'm gonna go around the room, and if you could just briefly, give us kind of an update on, or how did you feel about this meeting? I guess that's probably the best way to say it. How did you feel about the meeting, and if there was anything profound that you got out of this that you didn't know when you came here? That would be something that would be interesting to add. I'm gonna go around the room, starting with Pam, and go that way, and everybody get a chance to speak.
How did I feel about the meeting? That was very interesting. I find that transhumanism is a big catch-all phrase for so many things that it's pretty much impossible to. We just took little stabs at the topic, so it was interesting and a lot more to learn.
Right, thanks. Richard?
I'll echo that. I think it was too large of a topic to focus down on something smaller within transhumanism.
All right, Michelle?
What I came away with is that humanity needs to tread very carefully.
Yeah, I would agree.
What was that? Sorry.
Tread carefully.
Humanity needs to tread very carefully.
Yeah. Sean?
I really appreciate that this discussion happened. It was really insightful for me, and I feel like I got to learn a lot about the variety of viewpoints that everyone could be bringing to something as paradigm shifting as transhumanism is now.
Yeah. Okay. Jetty?
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I just like everybody's completely different perspective on this, like really big topic and the angle that they were taking at it, and I thought that was really cool.
Barbara?
Well, it was a good discussion, and I think I have a real good idea of what it is.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Mary?
I feel like this, I would have to be a PhD to study this.
And that won't guarantee anything, I know.
I had to become transhuman and require a higher intelligence and the need to learn physics. And so I can get into the artificial, what is it called, artificial intelligence.
Right.
But my real concern now is today is the drone wars that are already doing the robotic thing, very destructive. And we haven't talked about that, but we're already into that destructive part of the aspect of science.
Okay.
People.
Go ahead.
Well, this has been an exceptional discussion group, and really enjoyed it. I would caution, be careful what you wish for. More intelligence. I've known several really intelligent people. My father was an exceptionally intelligent person who was frustrated most of his life. He used to make a remark for so many people. It doesn't necessarily bring happiness. It does certainly bring probably the ability to get more aware.
We need common sense.
Vici?
I don't think it's about happiness. If you truly wanted to be happy, you'd have a lobotomy. It's not about happiness.
Huh. Okay.
can express their opinions and learn and not have any angst.
Yeah, that's cool, good. Henry?
Sean's comments captured my point of view.
Good. All right, Mary?
We're always going to be tinkering with enhancements and trying to improve things, but immortality is for science fiction writers.
Karen?
I really enjoyed the group very much, and I kind of worry about where this will go, though, if it gets into the wrong hands.
Yeah, right. Kyle?
I would like to point out, I am happy more often than any other state that I experience. This has been great. This is the largest group that I've had a reasonable conversation with. Other than this, the other large groups that I have conversations with are all on YouTube and not as reasonable.
Very good. Dan?
Oh, fun session as always. Thank you everyone that came, new faces and old. And like I said, I always appreciate it, look forward to it.
Awesome. James?
It was a really interesting discussion. I really enjoyed talking about the ethics behind certain aspects of transhumanism.
Very good. Andrew?
I just enjoy coming to these. It's just nice to see that the group is growing. It's really.
Yeah, big time. Chet?
Well, I just wanted to comment that I don't think that humans have any choice in any of this. As long as there's money to be made in it, it'll happen. The technology that we have now isn't because anyone ever wanted it. A couple hundred years ago, we couldn't even, no human could have imagined it. It's all about the marketplace, and as long as we're ruled by the marketplace, whatever we think is moral or leads to happiness or unhappiness or whatever is beside the point.
Got a good point. You definitely do have a good discussion on that, too, apparently. Okay, Nancy?
Lots of thoughtful insight and great group. Thank you very much.
Dave, I know you had a lot to say. You never had a chance to speak, but
Yeah.
what'd you get out of it
Let
anyway?
me sum it up in this. I agree with what Mary said was very relevant about we're already on our way to being to a great lack of humanity. There's a lot of social forces and what they are, and we can discuss some other time. This is simply the logical extension of that. To take some technology and actually change humans into another species is essentially bringing on the extinction of the human race. Now, some people may be comfortable with that, some people may not be. But that's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about the Holocaust that would make the Nazis look like a Sunday school picnic.
Okay. Jakob?
I thought it was great. I have nothing more to add.
I was gonna say, you normally have lots to say. You didn't raise your hand once. All right, Virginia?
I didn't really know what to expect. I read the articles and I still have a lot to think about on this, but I think my biggest fear is the focus on the technology without remembering what it is to be human and what is human. We didn't really talk about that much.
Right.
And losing sight of the interactions between each other. We're so focused on how do we technically make it happen? How do we make me better? How do I make me faster? We're not talking about society in general, how we're all going to interact.
Yeah, good point. Good, Karen?
I just want to reassure people that I asked my 6-year-old granddaughter on my way here if she would like to become a robotic person. And she said, no way, no. And she loves robots. So, maybe there's hope. But I just wanted to just say thank you. This was a great introduction to a subject that I am not familiar with and will want to read more about. So that's great, life enrichment here. And a great introduction to what I think some of you are, humanists. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought this discussion was fun. If slightly disappointing. It was kind of like showing up to a feminist group and then arguing about whether men and women are equal. Like, it would be nice if we agreed that men and women are equal and then talk about the interesting implications of that, rather than arguing about basics. So I think there's a whole lot of depth to this topic that we didn't get into. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that later.
Jeffrey?
Just a couple of things. When we talk, I think we kept saying the word immortality. I think it's more important to focus on the term longevity. The intent is to increase longevity through the scientific means.
It's a whole different topic.
Well, but we kept saying immortality. I think it was more important to say longevity, well-being, and cognitive functions. Those are the three key aspects around transhumanism. Also, not to throw platitude, but it's also to echo what others have said. It's like it is human nature to go into the unknown based on certain assumptions and driven by selfish motives, sometimes irrespective of morality. But be mindful that this is going to happen. It is going to happen no matter what. If any of you have done any research into CRISPR or Cas9, knowing we've identified and sequestered genes even from other species, and we can verily append them like a copy-paste into human genome to enhance, a human being, that it's not the future. We're making it happen. And what would have been interested coming out of this group is understanding what would be the humanist ideal of what should be. And I can't say it's going to be an Ubermensch. I can't say it's a super being because that gets into quite the opposite of what the humanists' philosophies are. But I would like to have that understanding of what is our perspective of, or the humanists' ideals perspective of what should be the end goal of doing transhumanism. If we could clay and model and fashion a being from into an ideal and having it work into an ideal society, what would it represent? What would it look like? The purpose, yes. Or the goal, the objective, because this is going to happen.
Big topic, as we can tell, so we might want to maybe have other sessions where we focus on sub-parts of this topic. Otherwise, thank you so much, as usual, for putting related articles on the website to prepare. We watched a lot of documentary videos, but maybe also can we send you some of the references that have been made, or if you have already taken note of what some of the references that have been made, movies, books, whatever, and keep that on the website so people can continue research.
Absolutely. Go ahead, back to the same meetup page. You have to go back into the past, because instead of future events, go back to past events. And you can post as many comments as you want. You just keep it going. The other thing you can do too is go on our Facebook discussion group and start a discussion on our Facebook discussion group. That's that. I think this would be a fascinating discussion on our Facebook discussion group. So, okay, Kay.
An amazing amount of information put out here, and gosh, now I'm gonna have to even look into it more. But it's really been great.
Maria?
I thought it was a really interesting discussion too, obviously, everyone seems to be in agreement on that. I also think that it could have been really interesting to take like one or two specific technologies and go into depth about how this would impact and how this could have this effect or whatever. So maybe in the future,
We'll have
on
the
your discussion
opportunity to
group or
decide
something like
that.
that. Yeah.
Steve?
I enjoyed it.
That's good. Like Joe?
Yeah, I also enjoyed it. I loved hearing everyone's diverse viewpoints on the topic.
Okay, Diana?
I enjoy listening to people discuss intelligently the topic that's quite futuristic without it turning into a fist fight. That was very, very nice.
Good. All right. Marty?
Yeah, lifelong nets where they do it that way, and some people weren't even there when it started, so they let them kick in that way. You might get a lot more.
Usually when we have only like, 10 people less than this, I make a point of making sure every person in this room gets a chance. I didn't get a chance to do that. Well, people have a lot to say, so. All right, Chris.
Well, thank you, good discussion, and thanks for leading us on this, Richard, it was good.
Nita.
Awesome discussion. And I am so impressed and can see a little bit of hope for the future by the young people here, the insight they have, the information they have, the ideas they have. You're gonna help make this world a better place, I hope. Again, if we survive the next 2 years.
We'll survive. So, my summary of this basically is that I ditto what several people have actually pointed to, is that we really basically just touched on this subject. I mean, there is so many aspects of this that we can really talk about. And the negative aspects of it, yes, we certainly have a lot of concerns going forward, but there's also, I think, there's so much excitement in the transhumanism communities right now, and admittedly some of that, they're being rather negative to those who don't accept it, which is not unusual. That's kind of typical. So yeah, I very much appreciated everybody's inputs, and as far as whether or not we can zero in on specific topics, the next thing that we're going to do is, in fact, pick a topic for next month. And typically the way I do this, for those that aren't aware of this, I have a list that has been perpetuating for month after month after month, and those that get a vote, even if it's just one vote, stay on the list. And those that get the ones that get the maximum vote is what we talk on the next month. So if I get even one vote on any of these, then we can keep that one on the list. We can talk about it next time, so it's not like it'll go away. But I've only got 5, and I would like to have 6. I'd like to vote on 6. So we have an opportunity to zero in on this. If anybody wants to come up with a topic that zeroes in on this and covers a narrow portion of it, then let's go ahead and talk about that. Yes, go ahead.
What would be the implication of oppressing voices in the political spectrum?
Implications of what?
Of suppressing voices in the political spectrum.
Yeah, don't we already know that?
We're trying to get there.
Look at the
All right, well, yeah.
Suggestion, Michelle, go ahead.
Oh.
I would love to do it like afterwards, narrow discussion that we had the other day, for some discussion.
Yeah. I think we do that too.
How do you?
Would you have a particular narrower, I should say, focus that kind of still points to this, but?
I think there were definitely a lot of different things that we could focus on, but I think one of the more fundamental things that kind of is a prerequisite for other things is what does it mean to want something? What does desire and value, what are they? Kind of a meta-ethics of preferences. Because a lot of people were asking, like, we could do this, but why should we? And so the question of, well, what is should and what is want, that's pretty important.
What is the purpose of this?
Sure.
I've heard that before.
That is an interesting perspective. Okay, so that
That would be as broad as,
I was gonna say that could be broad too, but yeah.
Catherine, are you essentially saying that if something can be done, should it be done?
Repeat that again?
Something, just because something can be done, should it be done? Sorry.
I would advocate kind of the inverse or converse or whatever of that if we want it to be done, regardless of whether it's easy to be done, if we want it, we should do it.
Yeah, I think the way you said, what's the difference between should and want? I mean, that sort of reduces it to what should be or what we want.
if I were to put forward a conversation topic, I would want to focus on what is desire rather than trying to argue the difference between ethical things and preference things.
So what I wrote down, what I heard you say it was, what does it mean to want something? Was that encapsulate?
And is it specific to transhumanism, or is it specific
Well, not if we
to
say it that way.
that even?
It's a pretty broad topic, but it's I would think it's a prerequisite to understanding transhumanism law.
Okay, all right, so what we end up with here then is 7 topics. And typically we only vote on 6 for this side of the crowd. I think we'll do this, we'll do all 7. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read through all 7 topics. This is not the time to vote. We're not voting yet. Just wanna make sure everybody knows what the topics are, and as I go through these, think about what it is you think you might wanna talk about next month, or anywhere in the future. So I wanna make sure that, anybody that has any interest in any of these in the future, at least raise your hand, but you only get to vote once. So we'll really have to seriously consider that. If any of these get 0 votes, then I'm gonna go on the backup list, which is a huge list at this point. So I'm gonna read these first, and then I'll ask if anybody needs me to read them again, and then we'll go through a vote. So first one is ethical responsibility to animals. Second one, is there a biological drive to believe in a higher power? Third one is, in 2065, whites will no longer be the majority race in the U.S. What effect will that have on our culture? Next one is, are all of our current wars justified? That's specific to U.S. is involved in. And then the next one is prison systems, how to improve them. And then the 2 we just added, what are the implications of suppressing voices in the political spectrum? And the last one, what does it mean to want something? Does everybody know what all 7 of them are? Does everybody know what they want to vote on?
Can you please repeat the last 2?
The last 2. What are the implications of suppressing voices in the political spectrum? And what does it mean to want something? Everybody good? All right, this is where we're going to vote. Pam's going to help me count because I'm terrible at counting. All right, so I'm going to read these off from the bottom up, and you only get to vote once. Please vote for whichever one you think you want to talk about next month. And like I said, anything that gets a vote stays on the list for next month, and then if it gets 0 votes, it goes on the backup list. All right, I'm going to start at the bottom. What does it mean to want something? Raise your hand if that's what you want. Okay?
This is
Yeah,
for
we're
real,
voting.
Chad.
Yeah, this is
a
voting.
real
This is
vote.
voting. You get vote once. I got 1 back there. 2. Catherine, you didn't vote for your own topic.
There was a better one.
All right, so the next one, show of hands. What are the implications of suppressing voices in the political spectrum? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. All right, next one. Prison systems, how to improve them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wow, okay. Okay, now, are all of the current wars justified? All of our current wars justified? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, Barb, Mary.
Oh, Barb, sorry. Barb, okay. Good, that stays on the list because I definitely want that one discussed somewhere. Okay, the next one. In 2065, whites will no longer be the majority race in the U.S. What effect will that have on our culture? Make 1, 2, okay. Next one. Is there a biological drive to believe in a higher power? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, thank you. That topic was the very first Inquiring Minds ever that we ever did in this book. It was the exact same topic that was 7 years ago. We're gonna do it again, somewhere along the way. Okay, last one. Ethical responsibility to animals. Who wants that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and everybody got a chance to vote, right?
5.
5? Okay, so the next topic, prison systems, how to improve them. That should be a rather interesting discussion. So, now I have a couple of announcements, really quick. First and foremost, our next speaker is next Sunday,
Yeah, July 15th.
July 15th, and what's his name? Rick Bronick. He's gonna be talking about what the hell is wrong with men and what are we gonna do about it? Seriously, that's the topic.
That feels offensive already.
Second, tomorrow night, especially Kyle, you might be interested in this. Tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, right here in this same room, the same table arrangement probably, we're doing philosophy under the influence. Philosophy under the influence. Basically under the influence.
So is there alcohol involved?
Alcoholic beverages are welcome. And break, it's a BYOB kind of a thing, but you don't necessarily have to drink if you don't want to.
Right.
But we do have some really intensely interesting philosophical discussions, and I think that sounds like something you'd be very interested in. Dan, what's the topic tomorrow night? Remember?
Number 35, Kant and categorical imperatives.
Categorical imperatives, okay.
Now, on
And
meetup,
on Kant?
There's a whole, Kant.
Okay, and I have one more announcement. There's a jar by the door, as Chris already mentioned, there's a jar by the door. If you can help, please pitch $1 or $2. Well, I take it back, I have 2 more announcements. That jar is our donation jar, it helps us keep the lights on, and we really appreciate it if you could consider pitching some money in there to help us keep this going. Last but not least, we have reservations at a restaurant around the corner. And we have our own back room, and we also have our own waitress, and those of us that are, especially those of us that are new, you probably would really enjoy this. I think if everybody here went, you would completely fill the entire restaurant. But I'm hoping everybody goes. Anyway, so it's the Mesa Community Restaurant. It's just on Country Club, right around the corner. So it's like not even 2-minute drive from here.
I have a comment and an announcement. Come again.
And I'll give you directions if anybody doesn't have directions.
For philosophy night, look on our meetup. There's a series of videos, and the meetup will announce what number videos we're watching. We have to watch the video before we come because we're not allowed, we can't show it here. Also, next Saturday, we are continuing our crocheted sleeping mats for homeless people. If anybody would like to join us. You don't have to know how to crochet, I will teach you, or one of the others will teach you.
Oh, thank you.
And that's also.
Who's going to